Inflation is skyrocketing, set to hit 6%, the highest rate since the early 90s, and working families are being crushed under the weight of rising bills, stagnant wages, and relentless tax hikes. Yet Labour's Angela Rayner seems determined to avoid answering the hard questions, and Jeremy Clarkson wasn't about to let her off the hook. In a heated and no-holds-barred exchange, Clarkson tore into Labour's contradictory housing policies, leaving Rayner stumbling for answers in what many are calling an embarrassing disaster for the party. The clash began with Clarkson zeroing in on Labour's ambitious promise to build 1.5 million new homes. On the surface, it sounds like a bold move to tackle the housing crisis, but how does that square with Labour's repeated insistence that there's plenty of housing available? This glaring contradiction was the first of many moments that had Clarkson visibly fuming and viewers scratching their heads. He asked the question that's on everyone's mind: if housing availability isn't a problem, then why the need for such an aggressive building target? And if it is a problem, why won't Labour just admit it instead of spinning contradictory narratives? Rayner, known for her fiery rhetoric, was visibly flustered. Instead of offering a coherent answer, she defaulted to vague talking points about Labour's commitment to secure futures and tackling child poverty. But Clarkson wasn't buying it. So you're saying there's plenty of housing, but you need to build 1.5 million more homes because, what? Just in case? Or is Labour making promises it knows it can't deliver? He fired back, his tone dripping with frustration. The inconsistencies didn't stop there. Clarkson pivoted to the issue of housing allocation, pointing out that properties originally intended for homeless families are increasingly being used to house migrants. How can you justify this to British families who've been waiting for years on housing lists? He asked bluntly. Rayner's response was a meandering mix of deflection and finger-pointing at the Conservative government. She claimed Labour had solutions and that local councils would play a key role, but Clarkson wasn't having it. Local councils are already saying your targets are impossible. Are you even listening to them? He pressed, forcing Rayner to confront her party's growing credibility problem. Labour's housing strategy is riddled with contradictions, and Clarkson exposed them with brutal efficiency. While Rayner clung to Labour's narrative of being the party of fairness and opportunity, Clarkson highlighted the glaring disparities between what Labour says and what it actually does. He pointed out that Labour blocked the Conservatives' nutrient neutrality plans, which reportedly would have unlocked 100,000 new homes. You say you want to build homes, but Labour lords voted against these plans.
Why?
Because the environment matters more than people's living conditions. Clarkson quipped, cutting through Rayner's attempts to justify the decision. Caught off guard, Rayner shifted the blame onto the Conservatives, accusing them of crashing the economy and leaving Labour to pick up the pieces. But Clarkson wasn't letting her off that easily. So your plan is to promise 1.5 million new homes while blocking existing proposals and ignoring the industry challenges? How does that add up? He shot back. The exchange was revealing, not just for what Rayner said, but for what she couldn't say. Labour's housing policy, already viewed with skepticism by many, began to look more like a house of cards than a solid foundation for change. As the interview progressed, Clarkson zeroed in on another explosive issue: housing for immigrants. Reports have surfaced of empty homes sitting idle while asylum seekers are being housed in hotels at taxpayer expense. Clarkson pushed Rayner on this, asking how Labour plans to balance the housing needs of new arrivals with those of struggling British families. Rayner's response, an awkward mix of deflection and rehearsed soundbites, did little to reassure viewers. "We will change Britain for the better," she said, but provided no concrete details on how Labour would address the tensions between immigration and housing availability. This wasn't just a bad day for Angela Rayner, it was a disaster for Labour's broader credibility. The party's housing strategy, already under fire, was exposed as incoherent and unrealistic. Local councils have repeatedly warned that Labour's targets are unachievable, and Rayner's inability to answer basic questions only added to the perception that Labour is out of touch with the realities on the ground. How can they claim to have a handle on the housing crisis when their policies and messaging are so riddled with contradictions? The public reaction to the exchange has been fierce. Social media erupted with criticism of Rayner's performance, with many accusing her of dodging the tough questions and failing to provide clear answers. "If Labour can't even explain their own housing policy, how can we trust them to govern?" one viewer tweeted. Political commentators were equally scathing, describing the interview as a gift to the Conservatives and a devastating indictment of Labour's readiness to lead. But this isn't just about housing. The contradictions in Labour's housing strategy are emblematic of a larger problem: the party's struggle to reconcile its promises with the realities of governance. Whether it's housing, immigration, or the economy, Labour's messaging often feels disconnected from the lived experiences of ordinary voters. And as Clarkson's interrogation revealed, Angela Rayner, one of Labour's most prominent figures, is struggling to bridge that gap. For Jeremy Clarkson, the interview was a triumph. His no-nonsense approach and willingness to ask the tough questions resonated with viewers who are tired of political spin and evasive answers. But for Angela Rayner and Labour, the fallout from this exchange could be devastating. With a general election on the horizon, Labour can't afford these kinds of missteps. The party needs to get its house in order, both figuratively and literally, before it asks voters to trust them with the keys to number 10. In the end, this wasn't just a clash between Clarkson and Rayner, it was a microcosm of the political battle playing out across the UK. As inflation rises, housing becomes scarcer, and public trust in politicians continues to erode, voters are demanding real solutions and straight answers. Labour may still have time to right the ship, but if this interview is any indication, they have a long way to go.